everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Anything presented by Moser Consulting. I'm your host, Angel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel. This episode of Ask Anything will play out a little different than most, as we're going to be listening to the origin stories of several of our consultants and how they got their start into data and analytics. With us today, we'll have Ari, Jason, Tim, Kris, and Melissa, who will be sharing their interesting stories on how they made their career switch from things like forestry, Japanese translator, a teacher, and an au pair in Denmark. So sit tight, relax, and enjoy listening to the interesting origin stories of our consultants. And now we have Melissa. Melissa used to be an au pair in Denmark. She has a very interesting story because she was supposed to be there for only a couple of years, but then a personal relationship came about and she ended up staying close to 7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it was 7 years, and she was taking care of kids, and then by the end of it, she had a husband. So
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sort of long road. Most of my adult life, I worked in retail, and then I had gotten a job at a daycare, which I really loved working at the daycare. And when I was working there, I had also at some point said, in my mid-20s, I really want to see the world, and I wanted to move to another country. So my friend said, why don't you be an au pair? And I didn't know what that was. And so I looked it up and she said, oh, it's kind of like being a nanny, and you already work with children, so maybe you'll like that. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. I do love working with children. So I found a website, saw some different countries that looked interesting, and landed on Denmark. My plan was to go there for 2 years to be an au pair, and I lived with a lovely family. I still connect with them. I had 4 kids that I took care of there. But I did meet someone when I was there and thought I would need a longer visa than 2 years I was allowed to be on as an au pair. It was 2 years maximum, and you couldn't stay any longer. You couldn't extend that visa. So that man who is now my husband, but my boyfriend at the time, said, why don't you try going to college? Because you said you always wanted to do that, and I never had. And I said, okay, sure, I'll apply. And I got into a business school in Copenhagen. While at the school, I still worked. I worked at a daycare then. After being an au pair, I got to a daycare in Denmark. And then I actually was a maid at a hotel. And then I got an office job after that. So it went fairly smoothly going from the au pair visa to the school visa. It was just a lot of paperwork, mostly.
well, and I'm happy to hear that the boyfriend situation worked out and is now the husband situation. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, going from the school visa to the marriage visa, that was a different situation.
Oh yeah, and yeah, yet another visa. I wasn't even thinking about that.
I had 3 visas while I was there. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. One of them, I guess the last one I was on, was similar to a green card, permanent resident. And
Okay.
but once I did have that, because at some point I wasn't in school anymore, I got a job as a maid at a hotel. And then while I was there, I thought, well, because I felt like I need to work while I'm in school, but I really wanted a student job. I thought that will bring me towards somewhere easier finding a job in my career if I can find a student job. So I was trying and trying. It was quite hard in Denmark because speaking Danish at a fluent level was not required, but very helpful in getting a job. It did take some time, but I did get a job at, it was a gaming headset company. They were Sennheiser Gaming, and then they changed to Epos Gaming later on, sort of after I had left. But I had this student job for 2 years there, and I loved it. And at the beginning of that job, I was mostly doing customer service, so answering questions on Facebook, troubleshooting headsets, making Facebook posts with marketing, doing that kind of thing. But towards the end of that job, I had switched departments. I was still in gaming, but I started working with the data team, and I started getting into data from there. So I was working in a lot of Excel sheets, and then kind of that was where I got my foot in the door, was just at the end of that student job. And from there, I was able to get my most recent job before working here, which was actually at another headset company where I was a Power BI developer there in Denmark.
Nice. Were those Bluetooth headsets?
Some of them were.
Is it named for a Danish king?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Excellent. All right, cool. Well, thank you. We really appreciate you taking us through your data and analytics origin.
To be here doing what I do now, it's so fun. It's so different. And I didn't know it was something that I was gonna love, right?
Right. Like, do you send like a thank you card annually to your friend that was like, you should be an au pair? Because
I
that
should.
that was like the first domino. It seems like that just boom, 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 boom.
It really was. It changed my whole life. That what felt like was gonna be a 2-year trip, and then I was gonna come home. I was actually gone for 7 years. It didn't feel that different. I know people say stuff about like work-life balance and things like that are so much better there, but here, particularly like at this job, I feel like it's great. So it feels the same to me. Like I don't feel like my job in Denmark was had all these like better, amazing like work-life balance benefits or these things like that. Like it feels the same to me in that regard. So I was like, oh, this is just how it works. But then I find out from other people like, oh no, I just have a really nice job.
Yeah, you can say that is highly complimentary of Moser, and they earn it. Like
Yeah,
I've never worked outside the United States, and I've had a number of jobs over the years, and it is by far the best treatment of employees and just culturally and atmosphere that I've
100%.
ever experienced. So
I wish I could meet some people in person sometimes because I have so many, I would say friends, like coworkers who are my friends who I really get along with, even from being far away. I just don't
mhm,
feel that far away
right,
in the
yeah.
same way. I don't know, I really love it. So I was really excited to feel not a huge difference because I know there was a huge joke that's like, oh, it's gonna be so hard. Work in America is so hard. And I thought, well, the only experience I have in America is working retail or in a daycare, which is definitely different and a lot more manual of like
Mhm.
running around kind of stuff. So I never worked in an office in America before, so I didn't have anything to judge it off of. And then after judging off of here, I'm like, why would anybody want to leave? Yeah, I would definitely give the compliment of that because it's definitely how it feels.
And with us now is Ari, who you might have heard recently also in another episode of Ask Anything, because she came from a background of teaching. And she's got an interesting story as to how she became a teacher and then eventually became a DNA, a data and analytics expert here with us at Moser Consulting.
I had known since like I was a little kid, I wanted to be a teacher, but I never knew what I wanted to teach. I had all these things I liked in school, things I was good at, things I was bad at. By the time I got to 8th grade, I started taking Spanish class. I loved it, thought it was so great. I said, I'll be a Spanish teacher. So
Muy
I'm
bien.
about 14. Yeah. And so I'm about 14 when I make that decision, and that's just what's going to happen. And I just stuck to it, stuck to that idea.
Mhm.
But the asterisk there is that at the same time, I actually am taking computer classes. When I go home, I do like little video games and kind of like learning how to do mods. And also at the same time, when I get to high school, I take my first statistics class. I love it. I think it's so cool. And I get an A in it. I do all my homework early. Same with my computer classes. So I always had the interest and the like desire for kind of
Mhm.
more tech stuff. But I'd already made a decision when I was 14, I'm going to do this. And so I was just like, this is what I'm going to do. So fast forward to I went through college. I got my degree. I started teaching while I was still in school, but you know, going up and up from there.
Yeah.
Um, and so COVID happens, and it is the end of my first official year as a full-time teacher, March 2020. Yeah. From there, of course, all everything is virtual now. Everything is heavily technology now. All those things I liked doing as a traditional teacher, I have to find a way to translate that into the computer, online, over video, on the websites, apps, all of these things. So that's originally what kind of put me back in the mindset of, oh man, I actually really like technology. I'd kind of forgotten how much I really enjoy learning the new stuff, figuring out how to use it. How can I apply it to the classroom to, make something easier, automate tasks, and all of those things. So I still do the COVID teaching a couple more years, but it is, I think it's 2022, where at that point I'm like, man, I feel like I can do more. Like so much of the teaching I had expected to happen couldn't happen anymore.
Right.
so much of just the landscape had changed, it made me get more and more interested into the technology side of my job. I kept noticing, oh, hey, if we used a, automated process for this, that would be easier. Oh, if we digitize that, that would be easier. Oh, if I make a Google form and I, set it up a certain way, the kids will get automatic responses. I don't have to wait and then write it all down. So as I've been going through these few years COVID teaching, I just see more and more opportunities to use tech basically to make stuff easier or faster or just communicate
Right.
better with all the families we have. Because I was teaching Spanish and English as a new language. So a lot of my families are going to be families that maybe aren't using English at home at all,
Right.
or maybe they do, but it's hard for them to talk about school related stuff. So that's where another place where technology kind of came through for me and helping me translate things quicker and helping me find ways to use text to speech so that the students could hear
Mhm.
all the instructions and things like that. And so, yeah, from there, I kept seeing more and more of how the technology can make the family engagement easier, can help out my students that are English learners. And that's when I decided, hey, I want to do more of the support outside of the classroom because I think I can make a big impact. And so from there, that's where I decided I would enroll in classes at IB Tech for data and analytics. And specifically, I went into data and analytics because there's so much data as a school teacher, whether it's just the data for the students in your classroom or just your grade level or your school or the school district. There's just so much data and it can inform so much of how we teach, what we teach, shifting right, shifting left, finding the gaps in what they're not really understanding. And since I saw like how important data is, I also saw how important it is to communicate that data outside of me, myself, the teacher, to the school administrators, to families, to the community stakeholders. So that's kind of what brought me to tech, data analytics, and data visualization, because I just saw being able to easily communicate why these numbers matter and what can we do about them. I just felt like it made such an impact. So that's kind of the full story there.
It's an amazing story, and it's a good transition, right? Because from where you began as a Spanish, as an ENL teacher, and then kind of thinking of ways to make the classroom, the experience of the students, and really your experience too as a teacher a lot better by using tech, that just kind of snowballed into, hey, you know what? I think I might just need to move into this thing full time. So let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I love a good superhero origin story. So that's
Yeah. Yeah.
on hell real quick. If you had decided on your career at the age of 14, what would you be now?
Oh man.
Because I would either be Spider-Man or I would be a lawyer. And or I would be like Spider-Man as a lawyer, which I think is kind of Daredevil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that.
I if I would have guessed, I would have said Batman or a professional basketball player, but I wasn't blessed with the height. I'm only 5'11. And I'm not a millionaire or billionaire, I guess.
All right, thanks so much for taking
Yeah.
the time. We
Thanks,
really
Ari.
appreciate you talking to us.
Yeah, for sure. And even today, I still see my students like, "Hey, Miss Moreland," and it just means a lot to me that even though I've transitioned out, I still have that opportunity to connect to so many students still.
That's
What
cool. And with us now is Kris, who's got a very, very particular and peculiar background. He used to be a Japanese translator. I got to say, we had somebody else on this podcast an episode or so ago talking about how they made a presentation in Japanese, which the other than konnichiwa, I can't just say anything in Japanese. So
and Sarah actually reports to Kris. So I asked him, like, you
yeah,
guys, or he's like, no, I actually we don't, and we probably should. I'm like, yeah, definitely do that at some point
yeah,
because you're both fluent in Japanese.
Education wise, my background was Japanese. So I was a Japanese major from IU. After I graduated, I initially went into a direction that was not at all data related. I went over to Japan. I taught as an English teacher in public schools for about 4 years. So during that time, it was, kind of improving my language skills, learning more about the culture and stuff, but really like not what I wanted to do long term, I found. So after that, I came back to the States, got a job as a Japanese interpreter initially with a manufacturing company. And that was also kind of like what I would say is my crash course into just like business in general, because it's hard to interpret things if you don't know what people are saying. I found so it's like I kind of had to like learn all about business as I was going, but pretty early on, like in addition to the interpreting stuff, they would ask me to like help out with presentations and things, which often involved working with Excel and trying to put numbers together. Kind of found that I had like a knack for that sort of thing just from like generally like being a geeky computer nerd as a child. So those skills did carry over a little bit. But basically, yeah, like after I think 6 months or so in that job, I got put in charge of capacity planning for the company, which is like looking at, okay, like here's how many machines we have, here's how much time it takes to make all of these different parts. And then trying to figure out from there, like, okay, do we need to buy more machines, or are there things that we need to be like moving around, all that kind of stuff, because it had been a big issue because everybody was doing it like very, very manually, trying to figure all that sort of stuff out. And I'd say like personality wise, I'm kind of like allergic to doing the same thing over and over again. So I was just like always trying to find a way to automate that. And so initially that was like with Excel, that was really kind of how I got like my hands dirty with data, I would say. And then like through automating that process, find that like I would free up some more time. They would ask me to do other things like, hey, can you automate this reporting for our scrap loss, for example, like how many parts we're throwing away each day, what the reasons are and everything. Kind of went in that direction a little bit more at first, again, still with Excel, but kind of pushed Excel to the point that it started breaking, I would say. And so I was like, all right, what other tools are out there to kind of like make this job easier? And that was kind of how I stumbled upon Power BI. It was maybe like a year or two, I think, after Power BI had come out at that point. But really, it was just like everything that we were looking for at that point in time, like just being able to really look at the data from many different angles and drill down into it, like cross filter, all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of how I really, I would say, like got into data and analytics to begin with. And from there, like over the next several years, it just kind of kept growing. Like as I was learning to solve new business problems, whether that was like the operations side or like production scheduling, quality, eventually it got more into like the administrative side of things as well, with like HR headcount and finances and that sort of thing. Yeah, that was kind of how like I got, I would say, like more of an education on like what's the best way for data to be structured for like the data modeling side of things in particular. Again, a lot of trial and error early on for sure, but kind of learning as I went on that and kind of like figuring out the best practices kind of on my own was how I got there, and eventually ended up managing what they called like the business strategy department over there. So it was kind of like a combination between an analytics role, but then also like using that data to like come up with like company targets and things like that. So yeah, it was really interesting kind of job overall, just kind of seeing that like data transformation happen over the course of like 5 or 6 years. But eventually it was, kind of started feeling like the big fish in a little pond sort of thing, which is why I came over to Moser, where there's a lot more people who have like a lot more experience in that sort of stuff. That's been great experience learning from everybody here.
Along that journey, were there specific resources that you used or would recommend if somebody was looking to make a similar transition or to get into
Yeah,
data analytics from even an entirely different background?
there's a lot of good stuff online for sure. I know with Power BI in particular, like I had just gone on, I think it was YouTube at the time. Microsoft had just like a very straightforward, like introductory course, kind of showing from like once you open it up and plugging in one table and then just kind of walking through like the interaction. So I found that sort of stuff useful for kind of just getting familiar with it at first. But as I went on, definitely found like some books in particular. Data Warehouse Toolkit is one that I'd recommend. There's another book called Star Schema, which is very useful for that sort of thing. I would definitely recommend people kind of try to start off getting a grasp on the data modeling side of things first, because I think sometimes there's this tendency for people will kind of go too far without getting a good sense of best practices sometimes, I think, and it can kind of develop bad habits. So just being mindful of that, I would say, is one important thing. There's also a lot of good free courses for like coding languages like SQL, Python, and stuff. I know Coursera, I had done some course, I think it was called SQL for data science. And that was, again, something that was just starting with basically nothing at that time. I had a decent understanding of like data modeling in general, but had never written any SQL. But that was one, like, kind of binged it over the course of a weekend, and I was using it at work the next week. So yeah, stuff like that I think is useful. And then there's several sites out there I think I had used one called 365 Data Science when I was learning Python that I found useful, but I think there's also sites like Data Camp and things like that. But yeah, in general, like I would say, in more than like structured courses, I would recommend people try to find like a problem that you're interested in solving. And that I think is the way that like you really get the knowledge to stick with you. So even if like your job isn't like strictly data, like I think, if you're working an office job, many people are, at least using Excel to some extent. So like try to get into the mindset of how can I automate this task that I'm having to do every month, and just doing some Google searching to try to figure out how you go about that. And even if you're not working an office job, like find some sort of like passion project that you're interested in, and find a free data set online or something, try to put together a project like that. Because I think when it's something that like you have a problem you're looking to solve and you're passionate about it, that's when, rather than just like, reading something in a textbook out of context or whatever, it'll stick with you a lot more when you can kind of think back on, oh yeah, like I had this similar problem in the past and this is what I did to solve it.
Well, thank you for joining us and telling us more about your conversion to data analytics. We appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And with us now is going to be Tim, who you might have heard before in one of our previous episodes.
Yeah, Tim joined us a couple of seasons ago for our episode on career rehabilitation. He started out in the forestry service before coming to data and analytics.
Before data and analytics, I had an interesting background. I came from working in the Forest Service out in Idaho for a few years, moved back to Indiana, got married, did consulting forestry for 6 years. So I done some consulting things, a lot of stuff around forestry. While doing those things, I was doing computer work and using different mainframe with the Forest Service, some desktop programming as a consulting forester. As I moved through those, I really liked that aspect of what I was doing. And I had a friend that was actually working at Anthem at the time, and Ty was subcontracting there with his startup company. And those two guys had met and talked, said, hey, I have someone that might be interested. I got recommended to Ty, and an interview with him went very well. My first week at Moser Consulting, I went and took a class from Oracle Education, learning how to use PL SQL with an Oracle database. Had never done it before in my life. And I think the people in the classroom looked at me like I was an idiot because I had questions about everything, and they were used to using the keyboard. They had used SQL before in their life, and I had not. By the end of the class, I was doing much better, but at the beginning, I had questions about everything. The hands-on part of that class, we were in a classroom, but I think there was 18 of us, 20 computers in there. Everyone got their own database to monkey around with and learn how to do things while they were doing it. I spent extra time whenever I could with the instructor in the evening when the class was over, getting more and more. I was hungry for information, hungry to learn how to do it. I really liked that approach. I liked the classroom at that time. As we all know now, it's almost all virtual. We don't get to go into a classroom and meet and talk with people like that. So that's been a big adjustment for me of learning it online. I guess I'm showing my age then too, because I graduated last decade from a university. I should say last century. Sorry about that.
Your introduction to data and analytics with Ty kind of reminds me of the John Wayne movie Hondo, when he teaches the kid to swim. He just chucks him in the creek.
Yep.
And you're still swimming, so well done.
Yep. And my first job, Ty was actually at the client with me. He was spending half days there and then going to another client. So he was teaching me what he knew too. I had the experience from the class and was getting a lot of hands-on experience. Not a lot of tools at that time, not a lot of GUI tools existed for database management and things like that. They were coming on board but they weren't very good. So we did a lot of things at the command line. So that's the other thing, is we learned a lot because we were at the command line typing the commands in to do it, not clicking on a button saying, go create this or go build this. We actually wrote the code that did that. So I think that helped too. Early on, I did get a certification, and I'll date myself here. It was an Oracle 8i. We are now at 23 AI. So that gives you an idea of how long ago it was.
If there's one thing I know about myself, it's that I love a graphic interface,
Yeah.
not a command line.
And who doesn't these days? I mean, you think of all the things that are available in cloud today, and it's just an interface and you're spinning it up. We were doing all that behind the scenes. There was no interface, so it was just you at the keyboard banging it away. The other thing that I'd say that I learned through that process, if you're building anything and you're coding like that, always save it as a script, because more than likely you're going to do it again. So instead of rewriting it every time, make sure you saved it. So I have lots of scripts of how to do things manually. And when the interface is gone and all you got is a dumb terminal, you can still get your job done and get everything going and not have to wait for the GUI interface to come up. I mentioned I took the first class, but then I bought books. O'Reilly Labs and some of the other big names at that time. I was using those books, going through with those. Those worked really well. I really liked the ones that had lab sections with them, so you could actually test what you were doing, not just read about it and then try to figure out how you'd program and build something. Quite a few of the ones that I picked, they came with, date myself again, a CD-ROM that you put in, and you could spin up some things and build a database on your laptop or desktop computer and do some testing of the things that they were trying to teach you.
Yeah, the first computers I was using were still had the floppy drive, and occasionally you'd have to pop it open, flip it over, put it back in, and it's like, oh, it's dual-sided, fancy.
Yep. I remember, I think it was Office 1996. It was 13 3.25-inch disc, and you had to go back and forth through them as you were installing it.
Yeah. Well, is there anything you use currently, like to pick up new skills or new certifications? What's your preference now?
It is online now. I haven't been to an in-person class in a while. I would say the big conferences around the country for the different things, Oracle, AWS, Ansible. I think there's some opportunities there with those that you could get some hands-on things. What I like about that is you meet other people and you grow your network, so you find out some other things besides just learning the technical stuff. It's a lot about the people you meet along the way and getting those friendships and being able to reach out to folks when you need more information, or you're in a pinch, or you're looking for work for your consulting company, or you're looking for work, or you want to move around the country. COVID happened, lots of people moved around. That network would have helped you a lot if you were jumping around and moving places. So I guess that would be the other thing, is most technical people don't like to talk a lot to other people. Get out of your shell and talk a lot to other people. It'll help you immensely, personally and professionally. The more you do it, the easier it gets. I know that sounds cliche, but that really, after you've done it 10 or 12 times, presentations in front of groups and things, you don't sweat it as much. You still are nervous about it, but you're not thinking of all the things that could go wrong. You're thinking of, okay, how do I address X, Y, and Z, instead of, wow, what was I thinking standing up in front of these people?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there are people who are just kind of naturally comfortable in front of groups or speaking, but it is definitely a learnable skill and one that anyone with practice can improve. And just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And it gets easier, you get better, and it does nothing but help you in your career prospects. That's a
Yep.
great point.
Yep. And the other thing I would tell you, if you're helping other people grow in things too, remember that the gift of feedback. Don't always give negative things, but give them feedback. If you give them something negative, what I always try to do is give them something positive, so it's just not a negative story. So what they did well, what's one thing they can work on? Try to balance those back and forth when you're given the gift of feedback.
All right, Tim, thanks so much for spending the time with us. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks.
And with us now is Jason, who is another teacher that came to us, came from that educational background, but then slowly transitioned into that data and analytics field.
I got my degree at Ball State in elementary education. After I graduated there, I took a long-term substitute role back in my hometown, and eventually got a job up in the Indianapolis area that allowed me, they like the the teaching background that I had. They were doing a training facility type of role position. So I never really did something like that outside of just being in a classroom setting. That was familiar to me. But they handed me a lot of Microsoft Office training courses, and I've, for whatever reason, took to the Excel material really well. And before I knew it, I had that manual, the 2 manuals memorized, and I was handling probably all of those outside, unless they were just really busy. Did that for a year or two. I think it was almost 2 years. That allowed me to learn a whole lot about Excel at the time, more than I probably would have imagined. And that got me into a position at a different company at Fiserv that, interestingly enough, the hiring manager there wore multiple hats, and she was hiring for a training position, but then also had a role in their data quality area. And that fit well for me because I did some documentation while I was a facilitator. And the longer that I was there, after I kind of got familiar with the business, she would include me in some of their reporting. So she knew my background in Excel and would always kind of ask, like, hey, this is what we're doing. Get familiar with this report. Is there a better way of doing something in this process? And that really, I think, launched my start in data analysis. I knew a lot of Excel. I knew how to do the things, but it was probably after that, I'd say 6 months to a year there, I got more and more involved, and eventually it turned into being part of the BI team at Fiserv for a number of years. And that introduced me into Power BI, and kind of, as they say, here I am. That got me into my role here at Moser as a consultant, where it really kind of uses all of those skills, all of that experience.
Was there a moment where you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally doing this?
No, it was kind of just the wave, really, that I rode. It's like when I started at Fiserv more in a training role, at first I spent a lot of time it was a production facility, so I'd spend a lot of time out on the floor shadowing the operators and learning kind of what they're doing to kind of really align that with our documentation that I was creating or updating. But it was just that slow introduction into their reporting that kind of created that wave, and I just got deeper and deeper into the reporting, deeper into the data, and it was ultimately just the two of us for a while, my boss and I, and then she even retired early at one point where it was just myself. Then I officially joined the BI team, but it was kind of they had locations across, I think they were globally, but specific to our business line nationally. But my boss was in Texas. We had another team member in St. Louis, I believe, and then some in Minneapolis. So it was kind of a spread out team, but that's when I kind of joined the BI team there.
And were they like facility specific there, or were they just working working fully remote? Or
each person of the team typically worked in that facility or at that facility. I was handling most of the Indianapolis reporting.
Okay.
Like, there wasn't a specific time or a moment where it was an aha, ironically, maybe, or just maybe divine intervention. A lot of what I did at Fiserv really fit. And so that being that kind of a transition, it was a really good, unexpected transition from my college education, getting my degree in elementary education. It was a kind of interesting transition that led me into that facilitator role, which I learned a lot about Excel and data calculations, things like that. That got me into that position where I started learning more of the application of the things that I had memorized about Excel. So it was just I'd say almost kind of a weird natural curve there, or natural wave that just, it wasn't like a spontaneous moment of like, I want to be a data analyst. I didn't even know what that was really growing up. You could have asked me when I was in high school, and I've never heard of it. So
you didn't know what a data analyst was. You were too busy analyzing data.
yeah, maybe that's what it was. Kind of the unique thing that I really like is in data analysis, at least my experience, it's not just numbers and analyzing data. Other part that I really enjoy is kind of the design aspect that I get from Power BI. I've always kind of had I don't want to say artsy because that seems to be too maybe defining or whatever. I'm not calling myself an artist. I have a little bit of an artistic maybe feeling there, being able to step into that design world a little bit. So I get a both going through data, crunching numbers, data analysis hat, but then also when I take that data and I put it in Power BI, it's more of a design hat and that creative flow there.
Yeah, the data visualization aspect really spoke to you. Okay.
Yeah, I realized when I was at Fiserv, I'm probably more OCD than I had realized beforehand. Ironically, I was in charge somehow. This isn't data analysis at all, but one of the hats that I got to wear there was AutoCAD.
Oh, okay.
Never touched it before, ever. And they had a diagram, a CAD drawing of the facility. It was a very large facility. And it just one day, boss calls me up and said, "Hey, you have any experience with AutoCAD?" And I was like, "No, none." Like, what is that? He's like, "Well, part of our new role, not role really, but part of his responsibility as the leader in his area, somehow we got AutoCAD." But that kind of opened the door for my design OCD, because having to measure everything to the half inch or whatever it was, lining things up, like that really kind of was like, wow, I could get stuck in that tunnel vision so easily and not even know what time it is. And it's 6 o'clock. And I'm like, I need to go home now.
Yeah, hitting your Ball State background, were you like just like going through your mental Rolodex? Where are my architect friends? Hi, I need some AutoCAD. I need some drawing, computer drawing pointers stat. What you got for me?
Right. Ironically, my roommate for a couple years at Ball State was in architecture school. Never reached out to him. I had used Photoshop for years just as a hobby.
Okay.
Kind of playing with some car stuff, renderings. Nothing crazy or probably that experienced, but it clicked pretty easily. I probably Googled some things on how to move, how to copy, and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I picked it up pretty easily, I think.
Thank you for listening in to this week's edition of Ask Anything presented by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to our consultants tell their origin story on how they transitioned to be data and analytics experts. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your ideas or topics with us on our social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.